Just a few days ago, the U.S. Central Command announced the establishment of a new unit already deployed to the Middle East, one that is dedicated specifically to operating one-way attack drones, starting with one based directly on the Iranian Shahed-136. Now, these new weapons are called Lucas, short for Low-Cost Uncrewed Combat Attack System, and at just shy of $35,000 a pop, they are undoubtedly among the cheapest missiles in the American arsenal, making it possible to field these weapons in sufficient numbers to saturate enemy airspace with targets that they can't afford to ignore. Now, this new unit, dubbed Task Force Scorpion Strike, or TFSS, is part of a Pentagon-wide effort to rapidly field low-cost drone systems for a variety of operational needs, effectively flipping the script, as one official put it, on nations like Iran that have made kamikaze drones similar to Lucas a central pillar of their offensive strategies. Then that makes sense. Not only are these weapons cheap enough to be launched in large volume, but they're also dangerous, forcing air defenses to expend expensive and limited surface-to-air missile interceptors to bring them down, thus making the airspace that much safer for other, more capable and more expensive aircraft and munitions. Or at least that's the plan. So let's talk about Task Force Scorpion Strike, their new Lucas drones, and how America's pivot toward cheap, mass-producible weapons is changing the way Uncle Sam goes to war. I'm Alex Hollings. Welcome to Firepower. If you're 21 or older, I've got something really cool to share with you. Winglore whiskey. A few fighter pilots with a love for great whiskey and even better stories set out on a mission to bottle the best in bourbon and American single malt, and what they created was Winglore. A craft-driven, aviation-inspired whiskey brand built around premium quality and a community of storytellers. As Winglore themselves put it, their goal is to capture the spirit of a squadron bar after a day in the skies, where stories get taller, roasts get louder, and the whiskey's always worth a toast. If you're 21 or over, you can learn more about Winglore's team, their whiskey, and the story behind the brand by visiting their site in the link in the description below. And if you're curious about their bigger mission, you can also check out their Join the Squadron page, which explains how supporters like you can become an official part of the Winglore journey, including all the eligibility details and legal requirements to do so. Again, this is for legal drinking age audiences only, but if that's you, Winglore has a pretty awesome story behind it, and I know they've got a lot more stories to tell. So I think it's only right that I start out by acknowledging that I was wrong about America's interest in fielding one-way attack drones like Lucas. In the past, I've argued that weapons like Iran's Shahed-136 and Russia's equivalent, the Garand-2, are little more than extremely low-capability cruise missiles, and with a half-dozen low-cost cruise missile programs already drawing funds from Pentagon coffers, there seemed to be little reason to dump a bunch of money into mass-producing less capable weapons that do the very same job. But it's clear now that I fell into a sort of classic error when it comes to discussing defense acquisitions, assuming the Pentagon can't walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. Or, in other words, I lost sight of just how big the American defense apparatus is, and as a result, how it can place focus and funding on multiple lines of parallel effort at once. Now, in a past video, I argued that low-cost air and surface-launched cruise missiles were the more logical choice to allocate funding to, but in reality, Uncle Sam has the cash to hedge his bets and bet on both. And objectively speaking, betting on both is the more effective approach. So, while America's long list of low-cost cruise missile efforts is continuing to mature towards service, so too are lower-cost, lower-capability weapons like Lucas, giving commanders a wider variety of options in the fight while really shaking up the combat calculus nations like Iran need to undertake when considering an attack. Now, since the days of Desert Storm, the United States has increasingly relied on a relatively small number of supremely capable aircraft and incredibly precise long-range weapon systems to serve as a looming deterrent threat to aggressive states, making it clear that America can strike high-value targets, command elements, vital infrastructure, and anything else they want with near impunity. And while maintaining that capability remains the backbone of America's way of war, the addition of low-cost one-way attack drones that can be launched in sufficient volume to overwhelm enemy air defenses can only improve the likelihood of mission success for those higher-end platforms and weapons. So to put a fine point on it, my mistake was treating low-cost cruise missiles and one-way attack drones, which are really just even lower-cost cruise missiles, like a this or that situation, when in reality, they can and will serve different purposes in a high-end fight. And to his credit, Tyler Rogoway, the editor of the Warzone, has been calling for the US to field these sorts of weapons for a long time now, making him one of the few analysts out there who absolutely saw this coming. I went back and read through Tyler's previous articles calling for the US to field these sorts of one-way attack drones as a part of my research for this video, and I recommend that you read them as well. There's a lot of great stuff in there. So, with my eating crow out of the way, let's take a look at what we know about these new Lucas drones being operated by Task Force Scorpion Strike, which is objectively the most G.I. Joe unit name I have ever heard. Now, Task Force Scorpion Strike is a relatively small unit made up of about 24 troops that fall under U.S. Special Operations Command Central, or the Special Operations Command element that oversees Middle East operations. This unit is the first to field the new Lucas drones, and while it isn't clear if these weapon systems will be deployed with conventional forces anytime soon, it is all but certain that the task force will soon be expanding its armory to include a variety of other drone systems as well. Now, details about the Lucas drone itself are pretty tough to come by. We know that they were built by Arizona-based Spectre Works, who already had a Shahed-136 clone of sorts in their product line that they called the FLM-136, which was meant to serve as a threat emulator, or in other words, it was meant to look and act like a Shahed-136 for American service members to practice targeting these types of systems. Now, CENTCOM's statements about the deployed Lucas drones suggest the same basic dimensions as the FLM-136, but it stands to reason that the Lucas may carry more fuel and maybe even a different engine than its target drone sibling, and we'll get back to that in a minute. SpectreWorks FLM-136, that target drone, is 9.8 feet, or about 3 meters long, and 8.2 feet, about 2.5 meters wide, making it slightly shorter but with the same wingspan of the original Shahed-136 that it was reverse engineered from. But despite a similar overall size and shape, the FLM-136 is significantly lighter, with a maximum payload of just 40 pounds and a maximum takeoff weight of 180 pounds, whereas the original Iranian drone can carry 110-pound payloads and often weighs in at more than 440 pounds on takeoff. Now, that difference in weight also dictates fuel storage and thus range, with the American-made FLM-136 offering a range of only a bit more than 400 miles, while the much heavier Shahed has been known to cover as much as 1,600 miles when carrying a fairly small payload. The FLM-136 target drone offers a cruising speed of 55 knots, or about 63 miles per hour, but can dash at speeds as high as 100 knots, or about 115 miles per hour, giving it pretty comparable speed to the Shahed. With a service ceiling of 10,000 feet, the FLM-136 is still entirely susceptible to intercept by shoulder-fired missiles like man-pads, but admittedly, that is approaching the higher altitudes of more common man-pad shots. Now, as you might expect, the much heavier Shahed-136 is powered by a larger motor, the MD-550 piston engine that produces right around 50 horsepower and measures in at around 548 cubic centimeters, versus the American FLM-136, which carries a 215cc carbureted piston engine. The biggest question I have about these new Lucas drones, then, is whether or not they're just armed iterations of the FLM-136 we know about, or if they were enlarged launched to provide added fuel storage, a larger payload, and a more powerful engine, more akin to Iran's kamikaze drones that it was based on. But to be clear, even if these Lucas drones are little more than SpectreWorks target drones with a blast fragmentation warhead, they could still be a very potent battlefield asset, especially when fielded in large numbers. With the ability to carry a maximum payload of 40 pounds, that would allow each of these one-way attack drones to carry roughly twice the explosive yield of a Hellfire missile to targets, again, literally hundreds of miles away. The Pentagon has been very intentional about calling the Lucas design scalable, which could suggest that it's either already adopted changes meant to extend its range or that it very likely could in the not-too-distant future. I'll quote CENTCOM's press release now. Lucas drones deployed by CENTCOM have an extensive range and are designed to operate autonomously. They can be launched with different mechanisms to include catapults, rocket-assisted takeoff, and mobile ground and vehicle systems. And at just a reported $35,000 apiece, we know that these Lucas drones are actually quite a bit cheaper than the Shahed-136 or Russia's Garand II, both of which are said to range in cost from as low as around $50,000 per weapon to as high as around $290,000. And with that in mind, it appears as though SpectreWorks has already moved into mass production of the Lucas drone, in whatever form it's taken. This time, I'll quote an unnamed defense official who spoke to the Warzone on the condition of anonymity. We are now at a point where not only are we building them en masse, but we've already based them in the Middle East for the first time. In essence, we're able to flip the script on Iran. I'll let you read between the lines, but the fact that we are basing it where we are basing it, and the fact that we have seen what the Russians have done to Ukraine, what Iran has done to fomenting instability with the use of drone technology, the 12-day war threats they pose to Israel, and how partners and allies have had to expend vast amounts of resources to defend against these attacks, we're now taking a page from their playbook and throwing it back at them. In essence, Iran enjoyed overmatch and an advantage through the high volume of drone attacks that they were able to effectively deploy. And they are hard to defend against at such a high volume. And that volume really is the key. These relatively large, slow-moving weapons are a lot easier to shoot down than faster and often stealthier jet-powered cruise missiles and the like, meaning one Lucas drone doesn't have a great chance at sneaking through an adversary's air defenses. Instead, the idea is to produce these weapons in such large numbers that you can launch dozens, hundreds, or maybe even thousands of them into enemy airspace at once, depending on the type of operation and the scale of the conflict. Now, this practice of flooding enemy airspace with too many targets to keep up with is already a cornerstone of America's new approach to large-scale war, with efforts like Rapid Dragon built around launching dozens of long-range cruise missiles from the backs of cargo aircraft. Systems like the ADM-160 Mauled designed to enter enemy airspace, broadcasting the radar returns of larger and more dangerous targets. Stealthy cruise missiles like the JASM line meant to sneak in amongst those cheaper cruise missiles and radar decoys to take out high-value targets amid the chaos. Crewed stealth fighters, guiding whole formations of stealthy drone fighters following closely behind, and seemingly countless new drone systems ranging from quadcopters to massive stealthy flying wings, creating a fully networked battle space above the fray. In a conflict against an opponent like China, with advanced air defense capabilities and an arsenal of anti-ship weapons meant to prevent American aircraft carriers from sailing to within striking distance, the initial days of war would see American air power working to blow a hole in China's anti-access area denial strategy by not just flying suppression and destruction of enemy air defense operations, but importantly, also hunting for and destroying anti-ship cruise ballistic and hypersonic missile launchers. Now, this work would have to be done by stealth aircraft with the highest chances of survival in hotly contested airspace, like the forthcoming B-21 Raider. But Lucas drones, or similar systems with sufficient range, could be launched from nearby islands to help inundate air defenses and combat air patrol, to improve the chances of success for those other jets. And once anti-ship defenses were sufficiently degraded, American carrier strike groups could close to within just a few hundred miles of Chinese shores to launch combat sorties of stealth F-35Cs to continue hunting for air and ship defenses. But a vital element of that strategy will also be maintaining a high operational tempo and a great deal of pressure on China's coastal defenses. And that is where mass-produced, inexpensive surface-launched weapons like Lucas could really earn their keep. At best, these drones could continue to engage targets from nearby islands and warships alike, further degrading coastal defenses and keeping China on its back foot. Or at worst, they could all be shot down by Chinese surface-to-air missiles, reducing the number available to engage more expensive weapons or crewed aircraft, and creating a very lopsided cost-exchange ratio for the Chinese military, lobbing missiles worth hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars at targets that cost less than a new Honda Accord. Now, aside from changes to the design, my next biggest questions about the Lucas drones in the field today all come down to targeting sensors and command and control, or C2. While both Russia and Iran have experimented with other targeting means, Shahed and Garand-style kamikaze drones are most commonly guided via inertial navigation, supported by GPS or Russia's equivalent GNSS. Now, this limits these weapons to stationary targets identified prior to launch and can leave them more susceptible to jamming than more advanced weapons, like, say, America's long-range anti-ship missile, or LRASM, which flies networked with other weapons and uses onboard electro-optical sensors tied to artificial intelligence to locate, identify, and distribute targets amongst themselves. At a $35,000 price point, it seems very unlikely to me that these Lucas drones would be carrying advanced onboard sensors or enough edge computing power for full autonomy in a jammed environment. But that unnamed source who spoke to the Warzone did say that they carried hardware that allowed for, quote, autonomous coordination, making them suitable for swarm tactics and network-centric strikes. Now, that tells us that, at minimum, these drones are carrying two-way data links that, depending on the nature of the network, could allow them to receive updated target information after launch and even serve as line-of-sight network nodes to maintain communications or even GPS access under jamming. Now, CENTCOM has also described these drones as capable of operating autonomously, but these days, that could honestly mean just about anything, ranging from blindly closing with GPS coordinates on a map like the Shahed, or intelligently hunting for targets like the LRASM, and just about anything in between. But more importantly, these drone missiles are all but certainly not in their final form, and will likely see modifications, updates, and upgrades as the task force gains operational experience with them. A 40-pound payload capability means these weapons could be modified, for instance, to carry miniaturized radar seekers, like the Apex 5S, developed by Virginia-based TSC, allowing them to engage moving targets while still carrying some 36 pounds of explosives. Ultimately, I really think the way these Lucas drones fit into America's warfighting doctrine is actually quite a bit different from what popular perceptions of these types of weapons would suggest. I see their destructive capacity, even with 40 pounds of explosives on board, as secondary to their primary role in suppressing enemy air defenses. When people talk about Russia's version of the Shahed-136, known again as the Garand-2, they tend to highlight Russia's ability to produce between 170 and 190 of these kamikaze drones per day, as opposed to ballistic and cruise missiles, which combined, Russia's pumping out at more like 195 per month. Now, those kinds of production numbers allow Russia to launch a lot of these drone weapons into Ukraine, at times as many as 728 at once. And when people hear about that, they tend to think of a terrifying swarm of drone missiles blotting out the sun and obliterating a vast swath of targets. But data from the front shows that, on average, only about 5% of Russia's kamikaze drones ever actually find a target, with the other 95% all intercepted by a combination of ground and air-based defenses somewhere along the way. And the truth is, America's Lucas drones are unlikely to have much better luck against the integrated air defenses of really any national military, let alone a well-funded one like China's. But in such a fight, that could actually be the point. Rather than seeing these Lucas drones as cheap weapons, we should think of them as cheap decoys that can serve in a similar capacity to the mauled or miniature air-launched decoys that I mentioned earlier. The ADM-160 mauled is, in effect, an air-launched cruise missile with the warhead swapped out in favor of digital radio frequency memory, or DRFM modules, that capture the signals being broadcast by enemy radar arrays, analyzes them, and then transmits a signal back, emulating the radar return of any aircraft you program it to, effectively tricking enemy defenses into thinking the mauled is a fighter jet, or a bomber, or anything else. Now, this forces air defenders to take each mauled seriously, because it could be a B-52 carrying 51 precision-guided JDAMs for all you know, and as a result, air defenses expend precious time and expensive interceptors trying to bring each mauled down, allowing for stealthier systems like F-35s, B-2s, B-21s, or even stealthy cruise missiles like the AGM-158 Javelin to sneak by while air defenders have their hands full with the swarming ghost bombers overhead. Now, Lucas drones could flood into enemy airspace right alongside those mauled decoys, but rather than using a false radar return to force air defenders to take them seriously, that 40 pounds of high explosives housed within the fuselage would represent the threat that can't be ignored. Air defenses would have to shoot the Lucas drones down or risk them closing with and destroying their own launchers, radar arrays, or other valuable assets, again, making the chances of mission success for higher-end platforms a whole lot better. In fact, depending on its intended target and circumstances, a $35,000 Lucas drone might be more valuable as a target that wastes a $1.3 million 48N6 interceptor launched from an S-300 than it might be as a weapon. So, while I admittedly still see low-cost but higher capability cruise missiles like Lockheed Martin's Comet, Anduril's Barracuda 500, Kratos' Ragnarok, Leidos' Black Arrow, and others as more potent and maybe more useful weapons on the battlefields of tomorrow at price points of around $200,000 apiece, the truth is, in American service, I was wrong to put these two types of weapons into the same category. Let there be no confusion. Cruise missiles of varying sorts will still be the cornerstone of future long-range American offensives, but rather than seeing kamikaze drone cruise missiles like Lucas as a less capable redundancy, I should be seeing them as a force multiplier, eating air defense missiles to clear the way for higher-end attacks screaming in right behind them. And that, honestly, makes tons of sense. And with that ends yet another edition of Firepower from Sandbox News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and now merch from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandbox News.